everyone, thanks for joining our webinar this evening or this morning, depending on your time zone. This is Jill Hurston. I'm in marketing at Sinners. We are actually coming to you live from India tonight. Mike and I are both traveling here, so I just want to first remind everybody I am recording this session, and you will all get a link to the recording and the presentation tomorrow once we process it. If at any time during the presentation you have any questions whatsoever, please just type them into your chat box and we'll get to them as appropriate. So with that, saying that, I'd like to introduce Mike Watson. He's the VP of Engineering at Synerzip, and he's going to be our moderator. Mike, over to you.
Thanks, Jill, and welcome everyone to today's webinar, Angular or React, don't roll the dice. In today's webinar, we're going to discuss two prominent UI technologies with the goal of accelerating your analysis and giving you insight to additional questions you may have when making this important technology decision. I know I've personally made this analysis myself. It's a little confusing to weed through the details. Hopefully we can streamline that process for you. With that, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. We have Yogesh Patel. He's the Director of Engineering and Practice Lead for React at Synerzip. And also Pankaj Parkar. He's Technical Architect at Synerzip and an active contributor and speaker within the Angular community. So Yogesh, for those of us that are not completely up to speed on React, can you give us a brief overview?
Yeah, thank you, Mike, for introduction. So let me move to next slide. So it's about React. So React is open source by Facebook. It's around 4 years now, and it's a library to build a UI for different platforms. So you can build a UI for web, for the browser, different browser, as well as for Android and iOS for now. So, and technically it's based on the components. So React provide a way to build a component, and each component might have a state and it can receive props. So I will describe more about the states and props in next slide. And React follow a simple concept called a unidirectional data flow, and it helps developer to maintain the code in longer run, and your code will be scalable because you are following that pattern. It's called a unidirectional data flow. And React internally use virtual DOM for the DOM manipulation. So the React algorithm to find out the difference between the virtual DOM and actual DOM, it's super fast and it improves the performance of your web and mobile application. And React provides something called JavaScript extension to build a component. So you can build a component by using a JSX to use your existing component. And React use CSS in JavaScript. It's something different with other library. But React recommend to use CSS in JavaScript because it's a component, and the whole UI is the component hierarchy. And here the main thing is the state management, and a number of popular libraries are available. We will talk more about Redux and Mobex. So it's all about React.
Okay, great. Pankaj, can you give us a similar explanation of Angular?
Yeah. So Angular is a kind of framework. It is a framework, so it is broadly used for creating and building a web application. So it has been open sourced by Google since in 2010. And if you look at the architecture of Angular, you will see that it strictly follows the MVC architecture. So I will go over it in the next slide. So let's keep that in mind. And unlike React, Angular also follows the unidirectional data flow. Like, if you look at the Angular application, it builds based on a component tree. So whenever we passes on any data from one component to another component, it flows in unidirectional. So that's why the name is unidirectional data flow. Apart from that, unlike the object-oriented programming like C# or Java, they uses something called as dependency injection. The same funda has been used by Angular framework to manage the dependency, and you will see that when you are using this dependency injection, your application becomes loosely coupled. One more thing I just want to mention is Angular has a CLI tool that is named as Angular CLI. So this tool helps us many developers to generate an application, just by typing few commands for generation of component or maybe a directive or pipe. And what happens with the generation of that particular scaffold template is you will see that whatever has been generated by that CLI tool, that is following the standard and the guidelines that have been provided by Angular team itself. And since Angular is a framework, you will see that everything meaning all the existing other ecosystem, you will see that that is there in Angular framework itself, like compiler, the forms API, the router API, or the internationalization API you will see in the Angular ecosystem itself. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, great. So I'm familiar with the MVC architecture. So maybe you can both describe to me how it maps into that MVC architecture. Yogesh, why don't you start?
Yeah, sure. So if you see this diagram, so traditionally in any UI development, this is a typical architecture we follow. So there is some library like Angular, React, or any other Vue or Ember. And we have something called model and the controller and the view. So this is a typical UI architecture. So now I will try to describe how React fit in this scenario. So first of all, React doesn't follow a separation of concern. And the reason is because React is just all about the components. And one component, if you think about one component, so it's one independent part of your whole UI application, which can be reused and configurable. So you can use the existing component to build your new component. So what I'm trying to say, a component contain whatever is required to show that portion on the UI. Like a component contain a model in the form of state, or component receive a data in the form of props from its parents component. So it's the model. So you can compare React component with all this part of the architecture. So one component contains the model in the form of state, which can be changed, and it can receive a data from its parent as a props. It's immutable, and the view portion again will be the part of the component itself. Means what you are going to do, you are writing a HTML and CSS, which is for the web, in the component itself, in the JavaScript itself. And the component again contain your business logic in the form of functions, a JavaScript function which actually modify the state of the component. So this architecture, so if you think about the React, so all model, controller and view will be combined together in form of component. And whenever you want to build another component, means you are creating a new UI, so you will use that existing component, you can compose it, you can configure it. And then it's a complete JavaScript code which represent the component, and that component contain the model for that component, the business logic for that component, as well as the HTML and CSS required for this component. So this is something I can fit React in this architecture. Yeah, Pankaj, so can you just brief about the Angular?
Yeah, so likewise I said Angular strictly follows the MVC architecture. So over here you can see the model, view and controller, and they are strictly binded to your UI library or framework. So if I want to try to fit Angular in this diagram, so I would say like whenever you are creating any component, you use something called as component decorator, and that has that over there you pass template and its style. So basically that template and style can be separately maintainable, and that relates to a view. Then later, if you are talking about the controller, so each component has a particular class assigned to it. So that class has a business logic. So that class can be called as a controller. And the third, and like controller can have the business logic and its state. And the state can come from a model. And that model can be considered as an Angular service. In Angular service, you can maintain your state. Or rather, you can also say that you can also use something called as Redux, which can be NGRX. Yeah, so that is how I just trying to fit the Angular architecture in the MVC. So yeah, that's it.
Great. I know you've prepared some additional comparisons, so let's go ahead and move into those. Yogesh, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So I will talk about this is an important topic for any new development, because so how much time to take learn React. So my experience and our team's experience, React is easy to learn. because overall you need to learn the component, how to build a component, what is the state, how to maintain the state in component, and finally what is the props. This is something, a few things which is required to learn the React. And second, the very important part is it just take a week or two if you are a JavaScript developer and you know how to build a UI for the web as well as how to write a JavaScript code. You have a choice to you can use a JavaScript 6 or the ES6 or with TypeScript or without TypeScript. And the React provides something called JavaScript extension. So it's you can compare JSX is a way to write or use the existing component object same as HTML or the XML. So you can build a component by using JSX, same as HTML and HTML element or the XML element. You can provide the state in your component. You can pass the data as a props. So this is overall about the React. You don't need to learn anything else. So finally the conclusion about the React is it's easy to learn, easy to understand, and few things you need to learn about the core concept of the React. A very few APIs available, and it's sufficient to build a UI for web as well as for the mobile. Yeah, Pankaj.
Yep. So from Angular side, I could say that Angular has slightly steep curve. So the reason behind that is when it comes to Angular, you have to know uh, a knowledge of TypeScript and plus some sort of knowledge of how observable works, which is reactive JavaScript extension, RxJS. And later, once you got familiar with this thing, you have to again look into how Angular framework works internally, like what are the directives that have been used for showing and hiding the DOM, or maybe just removing and hiding the DOM, like ng, fetch-g-for, and overall the Angular fundamentals. And this could take, I could say like maybe a month or maybe more than that. So it is, if you try to compare this learning curve with React, you will see that it is maybe double than that. But yeah, I would say like once you learn that Angular fundamentals and the prerequisites, you will see that they are no going to nowhere. Like you will see that like you learn that and they are making a profit in terms of productivity when it comes to application development. And yeah, and apart from that, Angular also follow the component architecture. Like uh, again, I mean, whenever it comes to application development, you will be doing, I mean, you will be subdividing your task features into a sub features, and for each feature you will be creating a components. And yeah, so slightly you have to build up the component thinking in yourself while learning Angular as well.
So Pankaj, so one question I have.
Yeah.
Correct me if I am wrong.
Yeah.
So what I heard, you're right. So TypeScript is the recommended approach for the Angular application.
Yeah.
But we can use Angular without TypeScript also, right?
Yeah, we can do that, but you will see that you will end up spending more time to see how we can build that application in ES5. Definitely you can do that. So earlier what had happened is when Angular 2 came, they have provided support for ES5 as well as the TypeScript. And later what they found is, like people are building the application, but they are taking more time than expected. And Angular framework says, please don't go for that. Rather go for learn TypeScript. It could take maybe a week for that. Just you have to understand how static typing works.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I hope I have answered your question.
Yes.
Okay.
Hey, Pankaj, I also have a question before you move on. I've also heard that in React, there's a second sort of learning curve plateau that once you get using it more in full speed mode, you have to learn a little bit about how to productize what you're doing. Is that true, or is that not your understanding? Maybe that's for Yogesh. Either one.
Yeah, I will take on that first. So yeah, basically I'm also doing a development on React projects as well. So what I have found is like whenever I'm developing a React application, at the starting phase I see that I'm making a progress, but later time I had to spend the time on how to architect my application when it becomes a bigger. But and I had to learn the state management thing, which is which is like ecosystem for React. You can't really have a state inside a React prop. I mean, it can be there, but it becomes difficult when the component size becomes larger. So better, Yogesh, can you
Yeah,
say a few
definitely I
words
will
on that?
answer and I will clear your confusion.
Yes.
So in React, whatever you are building, you should always think about the component.
Okay.
So whatever portion of your UI, it might be very small, it might be a big portion of your complete UI screen, it should be a component.
Okay.
And whenever you think it's going bigger and bigger, you should divide this UI in a different component so it can be reused. So the state is actually a data which logically represents some portion of your UI. Okay. And the portion of that UI is a component.
Yeah. Right. But what I have heard from the audience is like whatever my peers are like they are spending less time to learning React, but they are spending more time on learning the ecosystem like the Redux or the Mobex.
Yeah, exactly right.
So is it correct understanding?
It's perfectly right because in React application, creating component is not a big thing. Yes. Managing your data is a big thing. Okay. So you should start from the data management. Okay. So that's why that popular library Redux and Mobex it plays a very important role for any React application. Okay. You are right.
Okay, great. Why don't we continue on?
Yeah. So second topic, it's about the performance. It's very important for a web. And if you have a heavy application, and we all know as a JavaScript developer, so in browser, the DOM manipulation is a very costly process and it is a root cause every time for the performance issue, and sometimes it's a bottleneck. And so what React provides, so React internally use a virtual DOM. It's a kind of a lightweight version of the actual DOM in memory. And that virtual DOM is used by React to find out whenever there is a data change and whenever React think that now UI need to be changed on the actual DOM. So that virtual DOM will be used to find out the diff between the existing UI and the new UI which is supposed to be present on the browser. And this algorithm is very fast and it's based on the virtual DOM. And React then finally identify the portion of the DOM, the minimal portion of the DOM which need to be updated or manipulated. And apart from that, it's a core concept of React. So we don't need to do anything as a developer. But at the same time, React provide a lifecycle methods in the component itself for further optimization. Like you can say that I don't want to re-render this particular component if this condition is true. So this lifecycle method is there. I can say that I don't want to re-render at all. Okay. Whatever data is changed. So this lifecycle method is there. And now recently React provided a way for code splitting as a part of React library itself as a component again, because everything in React is a component. So you can use lazy and suspense as a feature for the code splitting. So not all the JavaScript code will be loaded at the startup time.
Yeah. So from Angular side, I just want to mention like Angular is there in the market since last 7 years, and just 2 years before Angular releases the newer version, Angular 2, and currently it is on Angular 7 version. So if you compare current Angular version, it is 5 times faster than the latter Angular version, which was Angular JS 1x, and which is super fast. And likewise, React uses something called as VDOM, virtual DOM in the system, like behind the scenes, but Angular doesn't uses anything like that. It perform a operation on the real DOM, but it has something called as change detection system. So what that change detection system is, like whenever you do perform any operation or any changes on the model, those model changes will automatically get reflected on the UI, and this mechanism is called as change detection. So Angular has several techniques to optimize that change detection so that the object will be immutable and it will be more performant. So there are few change detection techniques which will help you to optimize the further performance. And by default, it is super fast, and you can also utilize the feature of change detection strategies. And there are several lifecycle hooks for each component. Like, when component is getting destroyed, you can clear up several things, or before loading component you can do some stuff, and some same as that of React. And apart from that, Angular provide out of the box lazy loading. So what happens is, just assume we have a big application and that application has 3 pages: home, about, and contact us page. And when we are seeing only home page, we don't want to load the code of the other pages, about and contact us page. So that time the Angular routing provides a support for just to load a code that has been used by home module rather than the code of the other 2 pages. And this is supported by out of the box using a router API. And there are many things, but these things I just wanted to mention in terms of how can you get a performance benefit from Angular. That's, yeah, Yogesh.
Yes, sir. Okay, so again, I think for any UI development, stability is another point. So now React has now more than 4 years, and it's a very stable library for the mobile as well as for the web. And like we are talking about, we are comparing Angular and React, and React itself is not sufficient to build a complete UI, any platform for web or for the mobile. So it's possible, but it's not an efficient way. So there is a very strong community support for web and mobile, like for the state management. So Redux is very popular. Modex is popular library for state management on across the platform. The same for the routing. Routing again an integral part of UI development. So React router is one example. It's very popular and stable. And on the UI front for the web, so Bootstrap components are available as an open source library. Same for the Material UI. So React Material UI is very popular and it's very stable. It uses JSS.
Okay.
And this is the only library, I think, a very stable library which uses JSS. And for state management, because React strictly follow one-way data flow. So it's by default, it's very simple to read. So this help how you maintain your code and how stable your code might be. Because you are following a simple pattern, the good community support, all the libraries, utility libraries are available. You can use any of the library, any of the JavaScript library with the React as per the React concept, the component-based architecture. And I can say React is a very strong and stable library for now.
Okay. So let's discuss about the Angular. So the newer version of Angular has been launched just more than 2 years ago. And if you look at the Angular, it is likewise, I'm going to say it again, it is a framework. So everything is coming out of the box. And one more thing I just want to mention is it has a strong community support for web and mobile. So over here I said mobile. So mobile meaning it has, likewise in React you will see that there is React native community. For Angular native support, there is a native script community which has recently developed one package by which you can create a native first application, and later you can just use those native components into the web component or for the desktop application as well using Electron.js. And whenever Angular team is releasing a newer version, the upgrades are very smoother than other thing, and like recently Angular has released a 7th version, and those who are upgrading from 6 to 7 version, they almost took 10 minutes to upgrade their whole enterprise application. That's what I feedback got from the Twitter and the Angular team itself. And overall I can say it is pretty stable. The Angular core team is pretty much working on the newer version to making Angular smaller and smaller. So yeah, that's all from Stability.
Hey Pankaj, I got a question from the audience related to this particular topic. They were mentioning that moving from, there's a big gap moving from 1.x to 2.x and beyond.
Yeah.
And how do you deal with that gap?
Yeah, so basically, so there is one package called as ng upgrade, and by using that package, you can upgrade your AngularJS component to the Angular component. But there are many prerequisites, like you have to first migrate your AngularJS project to support a TypeScript. Later, you have to migrate your Angular component. There likewise, I'm going back again. Like Angular is basically tree of components. So there are basically two strategies to migrate your application. One is vertical migration and the second one is horizontal migration. And what vertical migration means is like you not we can go for first horizontal migration. In horizontal migration, what will happen is you have to take out the leaf components. What I mean to say leaf component is the component that resides at the bottom, at the leaf of the tree, and take that the single component and try to convert that into Angular 2 component. And likewise, just go up to the tree. And you can just take, for initial movement, you can just take one side of a tree. Suppose a tree has a two sides, then likewise you go up, and likewise that way you can migrate your whole application. And the vertical way is kind of, you can start from the top and go to the bottom, and this bridge can be filled up by ng upgrade library. So I would recommend you to go and look at the how ng upgrade API helps in this way. And there is one more way called as recently in one of the Angular Connect conference, one of the lady from Google team has made one different way, which is using Angular Elements API. So better, what I can do is once the presentation is complete, I can put up that link in the chat box, so you can go over that.
Okay, great. Another question similar. In React, is there a similar gap in that ecosystem? Is there any challenges moving up versions, or are we pretty strong there?
Right. So there is no gap on the React side, because whatever new version is coming, so there is a backward compatibility, and the only thing which Facebook is changing is adding a extra lifecycle method or upgrading the existing lifecycle method. So component is again a component. So till now.
Yeah. So I just want to ask one more thing. Like maybe that guy's question could be how the ecosystem changes. Like suppose you are just wanted to update the React to version 15 to version 16.
Right,
and
right.
you have a ecosystem library.
That is very good question.
Yeah,
I understand. So
yeah.
because you depend on some third party library. Yes. Third party means the community supported library. Yes. So it's a biggest hurdle. You are right in React. So if you are using something which is not this much popular and which is not this much stable, it's open source. You have to wait because you depend on that library. But that's the reason. So whenever you select any dependent library for the React, you should be very careful what you are going to use. Okay. It should be popular. It should be stable. Okay. And
it should be active.
It should be active. You are right. And they are migrating as whenever there is a new React version, so they have to migrate, right? Yeah. Otherwise, you are going to modify their library again.
That's why generally people go for something called as Kendo or maybe Dev Express. Those guys are kind of they stay up to date because they have a UI library product.
Right. So this is something we should be very careful in case of React.
Okay, great. Feel free to continue.
Yeah. So next is related with the stability, about the maintainability of your code. And for React, what I can say, it's if you compare with Angular as a framework, it's a use framework, provide everything. So React is a view library, and everything is a component. So you have to maintain the component. You have to maintain the components means you have to maintain whenever there is a change, whenever there is an enhancement, you have to update the state data. You have to sometime update the UI, which is actually part of the component. Yeah. And again, like we already discussed, so component is the smallest part of your complete UI. It should be independent. It should be reusable. Yeah. Because you are following that pattern. You are following one-way data flow. One-way data flow is a simple concept. So data is flowing from parent component to bottom component or the leaf component. Yes. There is no way. There should not be any way to reverse direction. Yeah. So you should not use pub and sub. So this is the few things, very small thing we have to take care in React, and it make your code maintainable for longer run.
Okay. So basically we can say that whenever we are just, like whenever our component is becoming bigger, like 200 or 300 lines of code, we try to break up it.
Right? Exactly. And this is a one reason you should think about why my component is big. Second reason, whenever you think this particular UI, because React, whenever you start building a UI in React, first you should have at least sketches of your UI.
Okay.
So you should first identify how many components I should build.
Okay.
And whenever you started building a UI, after some time, maybe there is an enhancement and you feel that this particular portion can be reused in some other script.
Okay.
It should be independent component.
Okay.
So two reasons. If your component is bigger, you should divide it in some different component or multiple component.
Okay, cool. So coming to the Angular, so if you, so same strategy Angular follows, which is a component strategy. If your component is going to be bigger, then we are just going to divide our component into chunks, and maybe sometime what will happen is some components will be dumb components. So the dumb component will be, like they are just dumb. You just need to pass on the data to it and they will show up it on the UI. So same concept what we have followed in the React. And likewise, I'm just like in terms of the other maintainability, Angular CLI is the tool which helps you to focus on the code structure and the guidelines. So whenever you use Angular CLI tool and when you generate a scaffold templates using it, you will see that you are from the starting you will be making sure that you are following the standard, and that standard are nothing but written by the Angular team itself. So there might be a less chances of you are going into the maze. And other thing is Angular uses something called as modules. So what happens with the modules is whenever you have bigger application, you can divide your uh, functionality into chunks of modules. And by having a particular module, you can reuse that module anywhere you want. And you can also load the module based on the route basis as well. So that's what from the maintainability side of Angular.
Okay, so next our topic is it's again related to the scalability of your application built on the React. So the same thing, same reason why React application is scalable, because you have a component hierarchy for mobile as well as for the web. You have one-way data flow. You have to strictly follow one-way data flow, and it make developers' life easy whenever there is an enhancement or there is a changes in the existing UI. So you know what you need to do. And again, a JSX is the easiest way to build a new component by using an existing component. And we always make sure in React we should not directly perform the DOM manipulation.
Okay.
It should be through the state and the virtual DOM. But sometimes it's required, but it's a totally different use case. But in the typical web or mobile application, we don't need to interact with the DOM directly. We never say that document.get element by ID and the interact style. It should be go through the virtual DOM and the life cycle.
Okay.
So if anyone is following this pattern, a simple 4-5 pattern, so React application is inherently scalable.
Okay. So from Angular side, it also follows the same component-based architecture design, which is I'm not going to repeat again. Yogesh already mentioned. But likewise, I said in earlier slide, Angular has something called as modules. So you can basically divide your application into, a different functionality, and that different functionality can be a particular module. And like your app, as in your application gets bigger, you will have a multiple modules, and based on the requirement, you can just grab in those modules inside a ng module. So if you are developing an Angular application, you must be knowing that an ng module has an import property. So one ng module can import a multiple modules. So if you are object oriented guy, you can also think of the same way. Like in Java, we do imports, and in C# we do using statements. So similarly, the modules are in that way, like they are kind of DLL kind of thing. And the one more thing is, whenever you want to add any behavior on top of DOM, you can just create a directive. So the directive is the better and a very great way to like create a feature which is adding a behavior on top of DOM. So the great example of this could be if you want a drag and drop behavior, you can just create a directive called as drag and drop, and you will be just writing that functionality once. And the directive can be used on top of any DOM, like you will be just mentioning that attribute on top of that DOM, and that particular div or whatever element that will become a draggable. And that kind of capability has been provided by directive, and this helps in scale your application at higher level. So yeah, that's what from the Angular side for scalability.
Okay, so for React ecosystem, so React application heavily depend on the community support because React as a library is just a view. So you need a libraries for the routing, for the UI, for state management,
Okay.
at least for any React application. But I can say now, so it's very stable community support now, and you can find all the suitable and the stable library in this particular forum. So awesome React. So it mentions all the popular and stable libraries for all portion and all part of the UI development. And a few examples like React Router is very popular for the web, at least I can say. So it's very powerful, and the unique feature of the React Router is it provide a dynamic routing.
Okay.
Not the static routing. So because it's a component. So in any library of React, they provide component for different purpose. So as and when required, you can use that component by using JSX to provide a routing for a particular portion, not for the whole script. So based on the URL, you can modify one particular small portion of your UI as a component. So this is a great thing available in React Router. For state management, Redux and Mobex, this open source library are available, and the Redux and Mobex can be used cross-platform. So if you are writing a code in React, so only the UI thing could be different. For it should be different for the Android, iOS, and web, but the other portion can be reused.
Okay.
So same code base can be reused for web as well as for the mobile. And React Bootstrap, Material UI, these are two popular library for the web. If you are building a UI for the browser, a React Native base is for the, this is just one example. So this is a UI library for React Native for the mobile, and React Navigation is something you can compare with React Router for the mobile.
Okay.
So you can move here and there, and then you can build a mobile application with the deep linking also.
Okay. So same way, Angular is likewise. I'm again going to say Angular is a framework. So it has everything out of the box. So when I'm saying out of the box, so it has all the features that are needful for building an application that are baked in inside Angular framework itself. So if I'm talking about just go over some features, like there is a routing feature that means the router is developed and maintained by Angular team itself, not by the community people. The internationalization support, the compiler support, the forms API, the material design, Angular version, and there are many APIs that have been supported by Angular team itself. So if you look at the React, you will see that this kind of API, like you have to go in the market and search for a good API who supports for that. But these things are supported by in Angular out of the box. And the one more thing is there are very mature list of third-party UI library that are exist, and they stay up to date for UI kind of stuff. Like the stuff kind of you want a table, grid, or pivot elements. Those kind of stuff is supported by the third-party library. Those are kind of DevExpress, Kendo, and Infragistics. So yeah, so overall Angular has a good ecosystem, and people are using it very much in their projects, enterprise projects. So yeah, that's all.
Okay. So this is again an important point for the UI development. So testability. So on React side, React as a library is just a view. So again, you can use any library available in JavaScript world for the unit testing. But for the component testing, React provides Jest.
Okay.
So Jest is an efficient way to write a unit test case for your component and whatever business logic you have written in your component.
Okay.
So the Jest is the way you can mix Jest with any of the existing library like Jasmine or Karma or Engine to write a complete unit test case for your components. And for end-to-end testing, again, you can use anything which is available in JavaScript world. Selenium is very popular. I just mentioned the name of Selenium here.
Also, we can use Cypress, I guess.
Yeah, anything which can be used with the JavaScript.
Okay.
There is no restrictions
behind this.
Right.
Okay. So on Angular side, similarly, the Karma, Jasmine, or Jest can be used for the unit testing purpose. and the protractor can be used for end-to-end testing. Like this is not the thing like you can only use protractor, but this is preferred way, but you can also go for Selenium or Cypress as well. Likewise React. So both, I mean, we can say both in the testability point of view, you can see both will be playing a similar role. But in Angular, when it comes to a testing with the module or any dependency, you can just mock that dependency using a mock stub, and which is, I mean, which is normal in terms of testing.
Right.
So, yeah. So in React also we do that.
Definitely.
That's correct.
So it's same actually.
Okay. Okay. So that's all about the testability.
Yeah, so that was a lot to take in. Actually, I have a couple of questions, sort of related to where we're at in the slides here, and then I'd like to pull together a summary of all of this right after that. So let's jump into the questions. These are coming from the users, attendees. One question is about the user experience. When you're using React or when you're using Angular, is the user experience different, the same? Is that a dimension that would be a deciding factor?
Right. So user experience is definitely not related with any of the thing, any JavaScript library. React and Angular provide a pattern. It's a design pattern. So like Angular is a framework, it provides everything to build the UI, but not CSS. Same for the React. React provide a concept, and like Angular, it has its unique design pattern, create a component, maintain the state, pass the data as props, one-way data flow, and JSX. So this is not related with the UI. So definitely there won't be, it's not related with the React or Angular. You have to create a UI and UX, and you have to write a CSS for that.
So just to look at that in a different way, if I could write one type of functionality, one website with both functionality, with both frameworks, and get the exact same results from the user standpoint.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Okay. There's another question here about is it only applicable to single page applications, or, and I think the answer to this is that it actually applies to all types of applications. It's not limited in that way. Do you agree?
You're right. Yeah. So React and Angular both. So, and the recommended way to build a single page application, because you are using a heavyweight library. But you can also build a multi-page application, like if you have a legacy application and you want to improve the performance of pages, then you can use React or Angular for multiple pages also.
Yeah. Just I want to add one more thing over here. Till Angular version 5, Angular was strictly known for using it on the single page application, but in Angular 6 version, Angular team has launched something called as Angular Elements, where you can just use Angular component outside Angular world. Like it can be combined with React application, Vue.js, or anything with, or Vanilla JS application, anything. So after Angular 6 version, we can say that Angular 6 can be used on any platform or any on with any other library. Yeah. So the statement is correct, like what Mike said.
Okay, great. And actually another question just came in related to this slide as well, which is, one second here, related to separation of concerns. Can you test the view and the model separately in these frameworks, or is there some other strategy that you need to apply?
Right. So in React, so you can test everything separately. So you can write a unit test cases for component. You can write unit test case for the state management, and same you can write unit test case for the model mutation. So I think it's the same for Angular.
Similar for
Angular. There is no difference.
So you can write it at any portion of the MVC architecture.
Right. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, and then as far as this is sort of a testing type of question, are there any visualization tools so that you can see the tree structure of the components, and also, does it show the relationship from components when they're nested together?
Right. So it's available on both the ends. So in React, number of tools are available. Very popular is a React tool. It's called the React tool. So in the Chrome extension, you can see the component hierarchy. Same for the mobile also. And I believe something is available for the Angular also. See the component tree.
Yeah, so for Angular, there is famous tool called as Augury that has been supported by Wrangle.io, and it is very good at look into what kind of dependency have been used by a single component, and what is the component hierarchy, who is parent and who are the childs. And if you have also any state management tool like NGRX, then it also shows up that like what this particular component has a particular state assigned to it or not.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so that is very very important for the development side. So it's very easy to debug, and on the React side also something called hot loader is available. So you can go to the previous state and change the data and see the results. So,
so there are some tools for Angular as well when you use NGRX. Yeah. So I guess in debugging or the testability perspective, they both are kind of same. I mean, they don't, no one lags somewhere.
Yeah, definitely. Both tools are powerful.
Okay, great. So let's move on to the summary and just like recap the key similarities and differences.
Yeah. Yes, sir. So let's summarize what we have, discussed till now. So in terms of, so if you look at the left hand side, I just have dotted down the point for React, and for on right hand side, I have Angular points. So React has been backed by Facebook, and Facebook has released this version somewhere around 2012, and Angular is backed by Google. So Google has released this AngularJS open source project in 2010. For templating purpose, React uses JavaScript and JSX. The JSX is nothing but a combination of XML and JavaScript inside a JavaScript itself, so that you can use HTML inside a JavaScript. And for templating, Angular just uses simply HTML and TS, which everyone knows. Like TS is something which is a TypeScript. For binding purpose, React only have a one-way binding data flow, and one-way data binding. But in Angular, you can have both one-way and two-way data binding together. A DOM manipulation perspective, React library uses virtual DOM behind the scenes for DOM manipulation when it comes to a binding update. But Angular uses a regular DOM. In application logic or states perspective, to maintain a state of your current application or the current page, in React we uses Redux, Mobex and Flux, but in Angular you can use simply service. You don't need to go for any third-party tool, or if you want to, then you can use NGRX, which is kind of a wrapper around Redux. And the last one is architectural perspective. React is a view. I just had a wrong thing in this, but just React is just a view library. It focuses on the view, and the Angular is strictly follows the MVC pattern. Yeah, that's what the summarization about what we have discussed until now.
Okay, great. So with that, can we move on to the next slide?
Yeah, please. So it's a kind of a conclusion. So in this slide, so what we are trying to say is when this is the biggest question. So when we should use React and when we should use Angular. So our experience, so it's completely depend on the nature of the project. Nature of the project means anyway you are going to build a web application. That's why you are selecting a JavaScript library. But it's totally depend on your team confidence. If they, one example, if team had already worked on Angular 1.x, so they are very confident about Angular. Again, the learning React is something it's easy to learn, but again, it's a drastic change. So because from separation of concern to no separation of concern, right? And again, same. If team has already about the components stay, then again learning Angular from the scratch is a big thing for the team. So it's depend on the nature of the project. Definitely there won't be a lack of feature if you are selecting Angular or React. Both are the same powerful library. And it's totally depend on your team confidence, so how comfortable they are with this library. There is no very strict rule, so you should use React and you cannot use Angular. This is not like that. And the one important part, what we realize, so if you are building a product, if you are building a UI and you have a large team, you have a remote team, they don't talk regularly, they don't communicate regularly about the code structure and design pattern. So it's very easy to introduce some bad design pattern or totally different design pattern in React. Because it's not a framework, right? It's very flexible. You can use Redux. Everyone is using Redux in their way. Sometimes someone is creating an action creator, sometimes they are not creating an action creator. So its flexibility is there. So it might be very confusing for the newer developer. If you want to enhance the product, then again it might be a confusing. So this is a problem what we experience with React. But I think this is not the case with Angular, right?
So yes. So in terms of in case of larger team which are working remotely, like there a mismatch between the time zones when like in the remote team it usually happens. So that time there is good chances of having a code spaghetti. Like one thing that is doable can be done in the different component with a different way, and there where you can see the Angular shines a little bit because what happens with the Angular is you can see that when it comes to a feature development or any particular thing, there are 3 to 4 ways of doing that, and there are very less chances of having a different code in different components. And by default Angular follows some standard and guidelines, and there will be a less possibility of having this this code spaghetti and the code smell problem.
Right.
And maybe a larger team which works remotely can suits with this Angular framework thing. But yeah, obviously this can be avoided by having a company level style guides and guidelines and frequent code reviews. But yeah, with the strict deadlines, it sometimes won't possible or it's sometimes possible. And yeah, with small teams, if they are working together at a single place and they are having a conversation together, so there we can just try to bring in the React thing as well. So I'm not saying that there we can't use Angular as well.
Right.
That totally depends on the point number 1 that we had discussed. But yeah, overall, this is our experience about the small teams and larger teams. And I just want to conclude that Angular and React, in my perspective, I worked on both the framework and library, and personally I found them really awesome at web application development, and I had a very good experience and building a great rich component UI. So I would say go for both. Like before going for that, just elaborate the parameters and the nature of your project, how it is. Will it match to your particular application or not? Yeah, that's it.
Great. So why don't you move on to the next slide? And this is a good time to, if anyone has any questions, to go ahead and type those into the chat box. I know that there's some good questions already queued up. If anyone else has any additional questions, let's go ahead and throw those in there. While we're doing that, move on to the next slide. Let me briefly tell you about Synerzip. Synerzip, oh, yeah, before I do that, I'm Mike Watson, VP of Engineering. You can also send questions directly to me via email. I'd be glad to answer them or forward it on to the experts on this panel, and they will also answer them. Keep going, please. So Synerzip, we're here to help accelerate product delivery. We can address technology gaps and help fill in gaps where it's not practical to hire those folks directly. We are a low-cost provider. In many cases, we can save up to 15% of what you would do locally in the U.S. And we also have the ability to augment teams on-site as necessary. Next slide. So Synerzip here in India, they have a team of 500 plus. It's a big team. It was exciting to come and meet them actually. And Synerzip's been around for over 14 years. So it's a partner that's been around for a while, and we're going to be around for a lot longer. Next slide. And then here's just a list of our 100 plus clients, just a select list. We're very proud to have these clients and we love working with them. All right, and then before we get to questions, and we're going to have a limited time on questions, and I apologize for that. I tried to ask some questions during the middle so that we get a good flow of questions, but we'll get to as many as possible. Just so everyone knows, the next webinar is coming up in a couple of weeks. I got a chance to meet Shahzad, and this is going to be a great webinar, so feel free to come onto our site, sign up for the webinar. Should be a good one. All right, so we'll jump into some more questions. And again, I apologize if we can't get to all your questions. We'll do our best to follow up directly and try to get as many answers to the questions as possible. And if there's enough questions, we could even consider another webinar to just go over more details on these technologies. So one question here is how are AJAX, if we can keep the answers quick, guys, that would be really helpful. How are AJAX requests handled in Angular React?
Right, so in React, so again, you have a freedom. So you can use polyfill, the Babel polyfill to use a fetch, or you can use a third-party library to communicate with the API.
Okay, so in Angular, you will see that there is HTTP module, which is HTTP API provided by Angular framework itself, and you can leverage that. And that will be that is efficient when you are using Angular. So what happens is when you use it, Angular automatically finds that once the response comes in, it has to be reflected on the UI. So it's preferred to use HTTP service or HTTP API when it comes to AJAX call.
Okay, and there's another question about server-side capabilities. The front ends, these technologies are agnostic to what's in the API tier or the middle tier. That's also true, correct?
Yeah, so you can render a React component on the server side if your server is based on the JavaScript, and it's
sorry to interrupt. I'm just saying. You can use .NET or you can use Node.js or any backend technology, right?
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, yeah.
Yeah, so here's another question. If users are frequently reading and writing data via the browser application, does two-way data binding in Angular make development easier than in React?
Yeah, somehow it's true because it makes developer lives easy to provide a feature, but if you see the maintainability of your code and readability of your code, then it's if you compare with one-way data binding, one-way data flow, then it would be very difficult to identify the issue after some time.
Okay. So you mean to say with two-way data binding, it becomes quite difficult.
Right. To understand for the newer developer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's correct. So in Angular, the two-way data binding haven't been directly implemented. It is based on the one-way data binding. Like it is a combination of one-way data binding, and they have made a two-way binding work based on the events. Like
that is the earlier version. But I'm talking about earlier version.
The AngularJS version has that problem. It was handling out of the box behind the scenes, and that was making mess when it comes to a more than 1,000 or 2,000 binding on the page.
Yeah,
So Angular had solved the same problem in Angular newer version, which is Angular 2+, and now it is not a problem. So yeah, so in both cases, so you can say that if with two-way binding, you will see that your application is working efficient and good, but with React as well, with one-way data binding flow, the same performance benefit you will get. The minor difference would be there of some minor millisecond, but yeah, they both will perform in similar way.
Okay, so one more question and then we're going to be out of time. And again, I appreciate everyone attending the webinar. It's been very informative to me and hopefully to everyone else. But the last question is, what's the difference between using the virtual DOM versus modifying the DOM? And it has to be real quick, guys.
Okay, so what is the question? So is there any difference, or what is quick?
Yeah. What's the difference between using a virtual DOM versus modifying the DOM directly? Like, what's the benefit? What's the downside, if there's any?
When you are using virtual DOM, so what happens with the virtual DOM API is that what virtual DOM API does is whenever there are any DOM changes are going to happen on the browser, it store the last changes, last DOM. I can say the last DOM state and the new DOM state, and it compares the last DOM state and new DOM state in memory. So it stores it in variable first, and then internally with React reconciliation algorithm, it compares what has been changed, and it detects what part have been changed, and thereafter React started making those changed thing, minimal change thing on the UI. And that's why the VDOM is quite performant than real DOM updates. So let's come back to the real DOM updates. When you have a real DOM updates, and likewise, I'm going to repeat the statement again that Yogesh said, the one of the most expensive thing on the browser is direct DOM manipulation. And and whenever you are doing that, you just need to make sure that you are not doing it frequently, because thereafter the repaint and the repaint and it is going to draw the layout and all the thing that browser does for each DOM manipulation. So but Angular has something called as change detection system, which is doing it very efficient manner. So you don't have to worry about even though Angular uses a real DOM or not. So in React it is using virtual DOM, but they are performant. But in Angular they don't have a virtual DOM, but they have a real DOM, but they are making a DOM changes with performant manner, making sure that they are also updating the part of a DOM that is getting changed. I hope this answered it.
Yes, thank you. So we've reached the end of our webinar time, and I'd like to thank Pankaj and Yogesh for their time today. And I also want to thank the audience for joining us. I think it's been a great webinar, informative. I'm sure it's created more questions than answers. And the goal of the webinar was not to try to help you fully understand either React or Angular. I mean, there's plenty of other places to go with that. And again, we have lots of resources where we can help you out. So if we didn't get to your questions, some of your more detailed questions, please follow up with me directly, send to my email, and I'll be glad to make sure those questions get answered for you. Thanks again, everyone. Have a good day.